the potential to cause offence. And
Yeah,
what worries
no,
me,
neither can truth.
right, quite. And so
Comedy is almost always truth, almost always. A comedian says something funny and it's true in a way that people didn't expect, and they know it. And
well, it's also that thing of teasing the boundaries of tolerance, of almost having that kind of cathartic effect. The way that the ancient Greeks would watch a tragedy and hear about the dismemberment and all sorts of vile things to philosophically to purge themselves of that evil that lay within. In a sense, when you hear a comedian say something utterly outrageous, it can have that effect on you, and you laugh in spite of yourself, and then you laugh again because you are saying to yourself, why did I laugh at that? That makes me, I shouldn't have done that. So you're almost laughing at your own response as well. It has a double effect. And we are really losing that. I mean, I don't know how it is in Canada, but in the UK, a lot of this kind of mistrust of comedy and mistrust of jokes and the idea that certain jokes normalise hatred is coming from the comedians themselves. And a lot of comedians take it on themselves to police other comedians' material, and they get very angry when people broach certain subjects. I consider it very, very unhealthy. And not all comedians, by the way, I'm not saying that all comedians, I'm just saying certainly the more establishment comedians absolutely would fall into this category. And it's really shocked me. This has been, since I started Titania in particular, a lot of comedians have been very angry that I mocked the social justice movement, or that I, which to me is a bit absurd because, I spent 3 years co-writing the Jonathan Pye character, and because that predominantly mocked Trump and the right and conservatives, and those were the targets. That was okay. So I never got this kind of venom about that. But as soon as I was mocking social justice ideology, which I perceive to be an extremely powerful ideology, this isn't. I don't think I'm punching down. I think I'm punching up at these people who have captured these institutions and are ruthless, by the way, absolutely ruthless, and bullying. I think the social justice movement utterly legitimises bullying, and I don't like bullies, and I like to stand up to bullies, and that Titania is my attempt to stand up against the bullies. But what they will do is misrepresent my intentions and will say, oh no, you just want to have a go at gay people or whatever, or have a go at minority groups, and I've been very shocked by that, because that kind of response has even come from comedians. And my view is that if you've got half a brain, that's not what I'm doing. You absolutely have to know that that's not what I'm doing, and yet maybe they do know. Maybe this is a willful misinterpretation as a means to attack me because I've mocked the ideology I'm not meant to mock. But I tell you what, whenever there are consequences for mocking someone, then I think that's the person you ought to be mocking, right? I think that's a sign.
Do you? Would you? What effect has producing Titania had on your life, and if you could go back and decide whether you were going to do it again, would you? I mean, it must be shocking.
Yeah.
I would think it's shocking to have seen what happened, to be at the center of what happened when you created that character. But I'd like to know.
Well, for one thing, I didn't expect the reaction that I got. Also, you've got to remember that for a long time the character, I was anonymous, because I part of the effects of the character was that people thought she was real. That was so sort of integral to it. And then I was outed by a newspaper over here the week that her first book came out. And that, although that was very good for the book because it generated a lot of publicity, because then the story became that I was the person behind the character. In effect, it had an enervating impact on the character, because now what happens, people know it's me behind the character. However, what I will say is, even to this day, there's always some people who fall for it. Whenever I tweet something, there's always some people who fall for it. So it has that. So there's that. But then there's the impact on my personal life. Well, I would do it again because I feel very passionately that the movement that I'm mocking, the ideology that I'm mocking, is a dangerous one. And I feel very passionately that it is divisive and damaging to society, as damaging as any ideology can be. I think it has the potential to go to those lengths. And so that I think I would almost be in dereliction if I didn't mock it. It would be. I tell you what it would be. It would be an act of self-censorship if I didn't go after these targets. And that's, by the way, how most comedians. I mean, a lot of comedians think this stuff is ridiculous. They won't go near it because they know that if they do, they won't get on the BBC and they won't get booked by certain clubs. So they just leave it well alone. But I think I couldn't do. I just, that's not in my nature. So I don't regret that. The fact that so many friends of mine, former friends on the comedy circuit, no longer talk to me. That's something which I suppose I could say is unfortunate. On the other hand,
How many times has that happened to you? How many friends do you think you've lost?
it's in double figures. It's certainly in double figures, and I think, and it's not just Tanya. It's also partly, I suppose, my politics. It's also, it, it's effectively being honest about what I think. And saying opinions that might not be the establishment or fashionable opinions, and it gets people very angry. I mean, one particular incident I can think of is when I met for a drink with two friends, very old friends of mine, a married couple, and he started screaming at me in the pub. I won't swear on your podcast, but calling me an effing Nazi, and then another word which I probably shouldn't say at this point. But I thought he was joking at first, and we had this conversation, and it was true. He'd completely bought into this fantasy of who I was, and there was no going back from that. And I know it was fueled by alcohol, but no apology was forthcoming, or it's, and then every now and then there'll be. I mean, it happened to me a couple of months ago where a comedian I've known for many, many years from the circuit suddenly sent me this abusive message online on Twitter, and started attacking me and saying he said I was funded by dark foreign powers or something utterly absurd, and I thought, well, okay, so this is now.
Of course, that is what you'd say if you were funded by dark foreign powers.
Well, this is the problem. Like I said, I've said it before. Like if I am getting all this dark money, it must be very dark because I haven't seen any of it. It's not. That'd be great, fine, but I'm not. And this idea that I'm this sort of, it's that going right back to what you said at the start, like that I'm defending free speech because because I'm an evil person who wants to say evil things, and so there's all of that, or that I'm mocking minority groups through Titania, which is absolutely not what I'm doing. It's the opposite. I'm mocking those very affluent and powerful people who very patronisingly assume that they know what's best for minorities. It's the opposite of what people say it is. But these kind of experiences, on the one hand, I think it's a bit sad, isn't it? Because there are people now, I've had to go through my phone and delete lots of numbers because I know we'll never talk again. But on the other hand, were they my friends to begin with? I'm not so sure. If they can suddenly become so bigoted, and that is the word.
It's an indication of how profound the divide has started to become in our culture, right? 20 years ago, I never lost any friends because of my hypothetical political opinions, but things have changed.
You must have lost. Your case must be much more severe than mine. Because you're so much more famous and so much more known. Have lots of friends turned on you?
No, actually, not a lot. There's some outstanding exceptions. Although even in those situations, I would say there was extenuating circumstances. No, I've been really fortunate in that regard that my close circle of intimates, my family and my close friends have been staggeringly loyal to me under
which is wonderful.
Severe distress. Yes,
that's wonderful. So is it maybe the case? Does that tell us that actually what it's really about is the fact that I was working in an industry, which is, the comedy industry is so on board with the woke ideology to such an extent that in fact, so many of so many comedians are now really just avatars for that ideology. Maybe.
I mean, my professional colleagues certainly haven't leapt to my defense.
Well, that's what I was going to ask actually.
Yes.
Surely.
That's pretty much done with. I mean, I would say my name, I've decided this recently, because of the slurs that have been associated with me, I can't in good conscience accept graduate students anymore. Because if they go out, you talked at the beginning about this register that's been set up in Britain, where if you are accused of a non-crime hate act, it's recorded without a trial. I mean, I've been on hiring committees many, many times, and especially in academia, there's an oversupply of highly qualified people, of radical oversupply. And so if there's anything in your record at all that's the least bit contentious, it's like you're done. And so being my student, that's not a little bit contentious, that's really, really contentious. And so it's now become impossible for me to serve my proper function as as a scientist and as a university professor. So it's taking a lot of adjustment on my part to get accustomed to that. And I don't practice clinically anymore as well. And there are a variety of reasons for that. But certainly I've become very, very susceptible to attacks through the College of Psychologists, the governing board. They can make the life of a practitioner brutally miserable with a single letter, and that's very, very punishing. And it's also perhaps not necessarily good for my potential clients to be associated with someone who's controversial. They already have enough trouble. So, although I've been fortunate on the family and friends front, on the professional front, things have been, more dismal.
Isn't that just suggestive of the power of this movement and the effectiveness of cancel culture? In fact, the ease with which people can become stigmatized. All it takes is a few accusations of you're far right or alt right or whatever, and it's there. Any prospective employer can Google that, and it comes up. And who's going to take the risk? The accusation is sufficient to damn you, and that's what.
Well, there, that you put the finger on the absolute catastrophe of the non-crime hate index. It's like, well, it's a permanent stain, especially in a technological universe where nothing is ever forgotten, no matter how long the lag.
And it's worse because the government here feels no compunction to address this, or to.
It's
no politicians seem to have. Well, I suppose they are. Well, because the strategy is that if you oppose hate speech laws, you're obviously a hateful person. Why else would you oppose hate speech law? It's the old thing, and a politician doesn't want to stand up in Parliament to be the one who is seen to be siding with the evil guys, the bad guys.
Well, you have to make a very, very subtle argument to stand up against hate speech laws, because you're faced with the problem that there is such a thing as hate speech.
Yeah,
obviously. And it's pernicious and terrible. It's like, okay, so you're arguing uphill. This is again why it's such a bloody miracle that we ever had free speech to begin with. It's almost inconceivable to me that we managed to generate the baseline presumption of innocence. That's a miracle. The fact that you can go bankrupt and start again, that's a miracle. The idea that you ever had free speech and that was genuinely the case, that's a miracle. And none of this is given the appropriate respect and awe that it deserves, because it's so unlikely.
It's hugely unlikely. I mean, I know in the book I give a kind of very, very short history of free speech from the ancient Greeks to today, and the point of that is to accentuate this point that actually the fact that we have it is astonishing and unlikely, so unlikely, and all the more reason why we need to defend it. We need to be really, really vigilant about any cracks that appear in this, because it will go away very, very easily, if we don't defend it. And it's hard, particularly when it comes to the idea of, and that's why I wrote a chapter on hate speech, because and took the other side's view seriously, because just trashing the opposing argument isn't going to help. We have to talk about it and explain, why it's important nevertheless. Well, for one thing, like you say, hateful speech exists. Let's start from that point. Let's acknowledge that hateful speech exists, and it can be hurtful, and it can do damage. But then the alternative is a state that might, in the future, be completely unscrupulous, that is going to decide for you what you can say, and those are the things that we have to tackle. And the other key thing is that no one knows how to define hate speech. UNESCO, the European Court of Human Rights, they've all agreed there's no way to define hate speech. Every European country that has hate speech laws has different hate speech laws, different definitions, subjective, abstract concepts such as hate, such as offence, such as perception. And these are on the statute books, and you don't want this stuff on the statute books, because it's all very well. I mean, I know we talked about the SNP and their hate crime bill. The defence I'm always running into is people are saying, yes, okay, technically someone could be arrested and imprisoned for saying an offensive joke, technically, yes, but no one in their right mind, no jury, no judge is going to. We've got common sense. It's okay. Well, that's so myopic. I mean, because you don't know who's going to be in charge in 10 years' time. You don't know who that judge is going to be. How can you possibly just...
You can be certain that someone will be in charge that doesn't approve of you and that you don't approve of. That will certainly happen.
You don't want vague vague wording on the statute books. It's going to be exploited at some point, even if it's not today. There's absolutely no way that you can guarantee it against the future abuses of that. And I don't. It is, as you say, it's a certainty. So I'm yeah. I think it's actually one of the most important arguments that we should make, and that we need to do. You know, free speech needs to be defended in every successive generation. It's not something that you know this. You get it and then it's there forever. No, that's not true. But there's something about human nature. There's something about people in power. There's something about the way that we are that it will collapse. It's an edifice that is not secure at any given time. But it's hard. It's that thing of being smeared. The risk is you're going to be smeared. You're going to be associated with the worst possible kinds of people because, of course, it's only really controversial speech that ever requires protection. And people are going to say, well, then you must support what these awful people are saying. And it's hard to make the case. But it's a case that nonetheless has to be made. And particularly by politicians. I've been incredibly disappointed by the way in which politicians in this country have not made any kind of effort to if anything, as from what I can see, there are moves even in the English Parliament to push through further hate speech laws. We should be repealing them, not pushing for them. But no one wants to have the argument. No one wants to be tainted.
Yeah, well, they get identified one by one and taken out. That's what happens.
Well, you get put on a list. This is it. The identitarian left, if that's what we're going to call them. I don't know what to call them. That's the problem. Is they're very clever about evading even a label. But they like making their lists. They like observing and saying, you are problematic. You have sinned, and now they have an electronic trail. These are the people that absolutely love going through all of your old tweets and messages, and anything they can find. And of course, the point about that is you can do that to anyone. There is no one alive who, if you had complete unfettered access to everything they've ever written online or in their emails or text messages, that you couldn't construct a case to damn someone.
That's actually one of the things that's more or less saved me.
Is that right?
Well, by the time I made my political statement, which was a philosophical statement or even a spiritual statement, not a political statement, I already had 200 hours of lectures online. And so essentially everything I'd ever said to students was recorded, and it wasn't possible to pull out a smoking pistol. So
this was very smart. And also, but this is why it's also astonishing. I find it unendingly astonishing the way you are mischaracterized because it's all there. Everything you think is out in the open. You've been very, very, very clear and explicit about your point of view. And so when they try and demonize you and turn you into this thing, people can check and they'll realize that I think what they're doing is they're relying on the reputational damage being a kind of barrier to people even investigating who you really are.
Yeah, well, to some degree that works, but it doesn't really work because what generally happens is that, for every person who wouldn't open a lecture because of my reputation, there's 3 or 4 who do because they're curious, and then it has an even more perverse effect on, in some cases, on the true believers because they're primed to find anything I said offensive, but that doesn't happen. Or maybe they even find it useful, and then that's not good at all. It's like, well, he's
Isn't that interesting when you meet the people, when you get into conversation with people and you can see that you're not what they thought you were, and they don't know quite what to do with that. And that to me is why, another reason why we need more speech, not less. We need to have the conversations so that people can be disabused of the fantasies that they've been wallowing in. But I do very much enjoy that when people expect one thing and then they actually speak to me and they don't see that there's no evidence of it because it doesn't exist.
Yeah, well, it's interesting to watch that unfold in the public domain too. I mentioned those 2 interviews, the Channel 4 interview that's been viral and the interview by Helen Lewis at GQ, and those interviews basically consist of nothing but the attempt by the interlocutor to have a conversation with the person that exists in their imagination.
Right,
which bears almost no relationship to me at all. That was particularly the case with Kathy Newman, and it was less so with Helen Lewis, but that was still essentially the issue.
It's quite reassuring, though, isn't it, that once it's out there, people can see through it.
It's very reassuring. Isn't what saved me, and this has given me an endless supply of hope, I would say, is that all I've ever had to do is just show everything. It's like, here's the situation, no edits, like this is what happened. And every time so far, you know, I haven't been fatally damaged.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I've learned most, I think, since Titania kicked off and it became a known thing, is I've learned simply never to trust the perception of someone as constructed in the media or online, or you know, it's never the same person. I've ended up meeting. You see, coming from the background I did, most of my friends were always on the left. I didn't really know conservative people, and now I have a lot of friends who are conservatives, you know, and they're just not this villain that they were made out to be. And even some famous conservatives who people have said they're absolute monsters, they're evil, they want to eat babies, basically, or the equivalent, you know, and you get to know them and you realise, oh my goodness, the perception is so far removed from the reality that even I once had bought into it myself, because everyone's telling me this.
You know, yeah, the same thing is, so I've certainly had that experience repeatedly.
I never trust it now. I like, whenever I hear the way people talk about people online, I never trust it unless I know someone personally. I'm never going to trust that again. I think it's an important lesson for me.
So what's next for you? And also, how do you make a living? You can't make a living as Titania McGrath. Well, I mean, you're locked down still, so it's got to be hard being a comedian.
Right. So, I mean, well, comedy came to an end. I mean, I did a stand-up comedy tour in 2019, early 2019, and that was really the last big thing I did, because as soon as I was about to do some more live performances, the lockdown came, and it's the same, you know, I'm not complaining, because absolutely every live performer has the identical experience, and we've all you know, I'm not in a position to complain, it's a very good question. I like it because it's also very direct. How do I make my money? Well, I write articles for various publications. There's the Titania books have kept me going. I obviously used to work on the Jonathan Pye character. We had a couple of television shows and live tours. Those were particularly lucrative. And for a long time, I did just make my money as a stand-up comic. So literally just the money I would make from the circuit. Now I've just got a job with. Well, it's you know, I gave up being a full-time teacher for this, and I was on a regular wage. It was a good salary, and I left it at great risk, you know, because I don't come from a wealthy family. I don't have the means to support myself without this kind of stuff. So I actually went part-time first and was on the stand-up circuit. And then I started earning enough from stand-up to get by. And so I went full-time stand-up. But I was genuinely struggling financially for a long time. And then Jonathan Pye happened, which was very successful. Particularly because we had a big viral hit around the time of the Donald Trump election, which actually went viral in America as well, and that really helped broaden the character. And then we did live tours and all the rest of it. We played the London Palladium and the House of Apollo, and so it was a big thing for me. And then Titania happened, and the book did very well, and the second book did well. And
how many copies do you? And you don't have to tell me, obviously, but how
I
many?
don't know. Actually, the truth is, I don't know. I that's something I should ask at some point. It's the sort of thing I don't look into. You know, I got a royalty check the other day, and I thought I thought it was done, and actually this was quite a lot of money. I thought, well, okay, that's good. This is something that can keep me going. But I've also just got a new job as a broadcaster on a new channel called GB News in the UK, and that will be a pretty full-time, full-on presenter job. So I will be. But what's good about that job is, you know, I think we have a real problem with the news media in this country, is that we don't have enough diversity of thought and the conversations that we ought to be having. This gives me an opportunity to do that. So it's very much related to the work I've been doing. But in addition, I'm going to continue with my comedy work and Titania. We're doing some live shows with Titania, played by an actress. We did that just before the lockdown. We had to postpone the tour. Now we're going to do another one. So I will, a lot of people get very scared by making a living as a creative person, because you're always on the line.
As they should be. Jesus, well, it's a tough way to make a living now.
It really, I mean, you're taking a massive risk, and most creatives I know are very, very poor. you know, it's simply not. And most have other jobs, you know.
Yeah, there's a tiny fraction that are hyper rich, and everyone else starves.
Virtually no one. And I consider myself extremely fortunate to be able to do this the stuff I love full time, because for most of my adult career I couldn't, and I was, you know, I had to have a full time job, and as well as go out in the evenings and do all of this stuff, and so it's a real. You have to really commit, and you also have to be aware in the back of your mind of the likelihood of failure. That's it. You know, that's the other thing that you have to be fully aware of. And I'm by no means taken for granted. You know, I think yeah, it's the stuff I've done, comedy and Titania, and the book I've just written. None of this stuff would make me rich. It would keep me going. The new job I've got is going to be a more regular income, which is something I miss. I haven't had this since I was a teacher. I missed that. You know, I missed routine and all the rest of it.
Yeah, well,
but
that's another complicating factor is not only if you're trying to exist creatively, not only is it a very high risk proposition financially, but you lack that psychological comfort that comes from routine, which, you know, artistic people often are hypercritical of routine, but God alive, man.